The gravel crunched under the tires of my decade-old sedan, a sound that felt both intrusive and final. Each pop and grind was another step away from the life I was trying to forget, and a step deeper into a quiet I wasn't sure I could handle. The city had a way of filling every silence, of papering over the hollow spots with sirens and chatter and the constant thrum of a million lives running parallel to your own. Out here, with the pines standing as silent witnesses and the sky a vast, unforgiving blue, the only noise was the one inside my own head. It was deafening. I had told myself this was for the book. My agent, bless her perpetually optimistic heart, had called it a strategic creative retreat. I called it running away. The truth was, the blinking cursor on my laptop screen had become a monument to my own inertia. For 6 months since Andrew left, my life had been a series of motions without meaning. Wake up, fail to write, drink too much coffee, fail to sleep, repeat. The apartment, once our shared space, felt like a museum of a dead relationship. Every coaster, every book on the shelf, was an artifact of a life that was no longer mine. So I packed a tent, a cooler full of cheap beer and instant noodles, and my stubbornly blank laptop, and I drove north until the cell signal died. The campground was called Stillwater Pines, a name that promised a tranquility I desperately craved. It was nestled in a valley, rustic and unpretentious. A hand-carved wooden sign pointed toward a small log cabin that served as the office. I pulled into a spot, the engine's ticking silence feeling louder than its roar had been. For a moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, a tremor running through them. I felt like an imposter, a city dweller playing dress-up in flannel and hiking boots, about to be exposed as someone who didn't belong in all this rugged authenticity. Taking a deep breath that smelled of pine needles and damp earth, I got out of the car. The air was thin and cool, a clean shock to lungs accustomed to exhaust fumes. I walked toward the office, my footsteps loud on the wooden porch. The screen door creaked open under my hand, and I stepped inside. The interior was dim and smelled of old wood, coffee, and something else, something clean and sharp, like sawdust or fresh linen. A single bare bulb hung from a rafter, casting a warm, yellow light over a cluttered wooden counter. Behind it stood a man, and my breath just stopped. He wasn't conventionally handsome in the way men were in the magazines Andrew used to leave on the coffee table. His face was all angles and planes, weathered by sun and wind. A dark, unruly mess of hair fell over his forehead, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed a jaw that looked strong enough to crack walnuts. He was wearing a faded gray Henley that stretched across a broad chest and shoulders, the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and dusted with fine, dark hair. He was leaning over a map spread across the counter, his focus so complete that he didn't seem to notice me at first. When he finally looked up, his eyes were the color of moss after a rainstorm, a deep and startling green. They weren't friendly or unfriendly. They were simply observant, taking me in with a quiet, unnerving stillness. There was no flicker of a welcoming smile, no practiced customer service greeting. Just that steady, unreadable gaze. Need a sight. His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the small space. It suited him perfectly. I cleared my throat, suddenly feeling like a gangly teenager. Yeah? Liam Keller. I have a reservation. For 2 weeks, the words came out sounding ridiculously formal. He turned to an old computer monitor that looked like it had survived the dawn of the internet, his movements economical and precise. He tapped a few keys. Keller, Site 12. It's down by the creek. He didn't look at me. He just slid a small paper map across the counter, his finger tracing a route. The nail was clean, but the cuticle was nicked, the hand of someone who worked. Firewood's $10 a bundle. Quiet hours are 10 to 7. Bears are active, so keep your food locked in your car. Any questions? It was all business, a clipped, efficient recitation. But I was stuck on the way his finger had moved across the map, the slight friction of his skin on the paper. I shook my head, my mouth suddenly dry. No questions. He finally met my eyes again. A flicker of something I couldn't name passed through his gaze. Curiosity? Annoyance? Tag goes on your tent post. I'm Cole, by the way. I'm the host. If you need anything, I'm in the cabin behind the office. Cole, I repeated, the name feeling solid in my mouth. Right? Thanks. He gave a curt nod, his attention already drifting back to the map on his counter. Dismissed. I took the map and the little plastic tag with the number 12 on it and retreated, the screen door slapping shut behind me. Back in my car, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My heart was thumping a strange, unfamiliar rhythm against my ribs. It was just a campground host, I told myself. A ruggedly attractive, utterly indifferent campground host. It meant nothing. But as I drove the winding gravel loop to Site 12, I couldn't shake the image of his eyes or the low timbre of his voice. For the first time in months, the noise in my head had been replaced by something else. A single, resonant note of intrigue. My site was perfect. Tucked away at the end of the loop, it was buffered by a thick stand of aspens on one side and the gentle murmur of a creek on the other. It felt private, isolated. I spent the next hour wrestling with my tent, the supposedly easy setup poles refusing to cooperate. I was sweating and cursing under my breath, my frustration mounting, when a shadow fell over me. "You're twisting the pole sleeve." I looked up, startled, into Cole's impassive face. He was standing there with his hands on his hips, watching me with that same unnerving stillness. He hadn't made a sound approaching. What? I stammered, feeling like an idiot. He knelt down in one fluid motion, his proximity sending a jolt through me. I could smell the scent of pine and clean sweat on him. Here, he took the tangled mess of nylon and aluminum from my hands. Our fingers brushed, and the contact was like a static shock, brief but sharp. His hands were large and calloused, moving with an easy confidence that I, a man whose primary tools were a keyboard and a thesaurus, could only envy. In less than a minute, the tent was standing, taut and perfect. "You have to feed it through without twisting," he said, standing up and dusting off his jeans. He looked at the sad pile of my gear next to the tent. "You done this before?" The question wasn't mocking, just a simple inquiry, but it still stung. "Once. In college. It didn't go well then, either." I tried for a self-deprecating smile. It felt weak. He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. His eyes scanned my setup, lingering for a moment on my laptop case sitting on the picnic table. "You here to work or get away from it?" The question was surprisingly perceptive. "A little of both," I admitted. "I'm a writer." "Huh," another grunt. He looked out at the creek, then back at me. "Well, writer, dinner's on me tonight. Camp-wide potluck. My cabin. 7 o'clock. If you're interested." And then he was gone, disappearing back up the path as silently as he'd arrived, leaving me standing beside my perfectly assembled tent with my heart doing that strange, lurching dance again. Over the next few days, I fell into a routine. I'd wake with the sun, make coffee on my little camp stove, and sit at the picnic table, pretending to write. In reality, I was watching. I watched Cole make his rounds every morning, his long, easy stride eating up the gravel path. He'd check the tags on the site posts, his movements efficient and sure. He'd stop to chat with the family in the RV across the loop, and I'd see the corners of his mouth lift in a rare, small smile as their kid showed him a frog. I watched him split firewood behind the office, the rhythmic thud of the axe a steady heartbeat for the whole campground. The muscles in his back and shoulders would bunch and release under his shirt, a symphony of controlled power. I was a professional observer, a weaver of narratives, and Cole became my unwilling subject. I cataloged the details. The way he'd push his hair off his forehead with the back of his hand when he was hot. The way he'd stand with his weight on one leg, one hand hooked in his belt loop, when he was listening to someone. The way his green eyes seemed to soften in the golden light of late afternoon. Our interactions were brief, almost transactional. I'd buy firewood, and he'd take my cash, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. The contact was nothing, a meaningless accident, but my internal monologue would spin it into a novel's worth of significance. Did he hold on for a moment too long? Was that a deliberate touch? I'd ask for directions to a hiking trail, and he'd give them to me, his voice that same low, steady rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. He never gave anything away. His expression was a fortress, but I started to notice the little things. When I was sitting by my fire at night, staring into the flames, I'd sometimes feel a prickling on the back of my neck, the sensation of being watched. I'd glance up toward the office, and I'd see a silhouette in the window of his cabin, a shadow that would disappear as soon as I looked. Maybe it was my imagination, my lonely writer's mind inventing a narrative where there was none. Or maybe it wasn't. The fourth night, a storm rolled in. It came on fast, the sky turning a bruised purple-gray. The wind whipped through the pines, a low, mournful howl. Then the rain started, not a gentle shower but a torrential downpour, hitting the roof of my tent with the force of 1,000 tiny fists. A crack of lightning split the sky, followed by a boom of thunder that shook the ground. I was huddled inside, my laptop safely stowed, trying to read by the light of a battery-powered lantern, when I heard a sickening crack and a heavy thud just outside. My heart leaped into my throat. I unzipped the tent flap and peered out into the deluge. A massive pine branch, easily as thick as my thigh, had crashed down, landing mere feet from my tent, taking out one of the guy lines in the process. The whole structure was listing precariously. Before I could even process what to do, a figure emerged from the rain-swept dark, a powerful beam from a flashlight cutting through the gloom. It was Cole. He was soaked, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his t-shirt clinging to his chest. "You okay?" he yelled over the roar of the wind and rain. "Yeah, I think so," I yelled back, my voice thin against the storm's fury. He didn't waste time with more questions. He was already assessing the damage, his face grim in the bouncing light of his headlamp. "The whole tent could go if another gust hits it right. We need to move it." "Move it where?" "Into the lee of the bathhouse. It's a solid structure. It'll block the worst of the wind." He was already pulling at the remaining stakes. "Grab your stuff. Anything you don't want soaked." For the next 10 minutes, we worked in a frantic, coordinated dance. We were shoulder to shoulder in the mud and driving rain, shouting instructions over the storm. I fumbled with knots while his sure fingers untangled them. He lifted the heavy branch with a grunt of effort while I pulled the tent free. Together, we half-dragged, half-carried the collapsed tent through the whipping wind to the sheltered side of the concrete bathhouse. My hands were numb with cold, my clothes were plastered to my skin, and I was shivering uncontrollably, but a strange warmth was spreading through my chest. The feeling of his arm brushing mine, the solid presence of him beside me in the chaotic darkness, it was grounding. Once the tent was restaked and secure, he shone his light on my face. "You're freezing," he stated, his voice tight with concern. "Come on." He led me not to the office, but to the cabin behind it. The door opened into a single, large room that was warm and dry and smelled of him. That mix of pine, wood smoke, and something uniquely, fundamentally male. A fire was crackling in a small wood-burning stove in the corner. A simple bed was neatly made against one wall, a bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks against another. It was Spartan but comfortable, a reflection of the man himself. "There are towels in the bathroom," he said, pointing to a door. "And I've got a sweatshirt you can borrow. Get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia." I did as I was told, peeling off my sodden jeans and shirt in the small, clean bathroom. My skin was pebbled with goosebumps. I scrubbed myself dry with a thick, rough towel that smelled faintly of his laundry detergent. When I emerged, wrapped in the towel, he was standing with his back to me, adding a log to the stove. A dark gray sweatshirt and a pair of worn sweatpants were folded neatly on the end of his bed. "They'll be big on you," he said without turning around. "But they're dry." I dressed quickly, feeling a strange intimacy in putting on his clothes. The sweatshirt was ridiculously large, the sleeves hanging past my hands, but it was warm and soft against my skin, and it carried his scent. I felt enveloped by it, by him. The sweatpants were held up only by a tightly cinched drawstring. I felt absurd, like a little boy playing dress-up. When I turned back, he was holding out a steaming mug. "Coffee. There's whiskey in it." I took it, our fingers brushing again. This time, the touch lingered. His gaze held mine, and the air in the small cabin suddenly felt thick, charged with the energy of the storm outside and a different kind of storm brewing between us. The professional distance was gone, washed away by the rain. "Thanks," I murmured, my voice hoarse. "For all of it." "The tent." He just nodded, his eyes searching my face. He was standing so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, the tiny scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the drumming of the rain on the roof. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but my throat was tight. He's going to kiss me, I thought, my heart hammering against my ribs. He's going to kiss me right now. But he didn't. He took a small step back, breaking the spell. The intensity in his eyes receded, replaced by that familiar, guarded expression. "Drink your coffee," he said, his voice back to its usual low rumble. "The storm should pass in an hour or so. You can stay here till it does." He moved to the other side of the room and picked up a book, sinking into a worn armchair near the fire. But he didn't read it. He just stared at the pages, his knuckles white where he gripped the cover. And I stood there in his too big clothes, sipping his whiskey-laced coffee, my body thrumming with a potent mix of relief and crushing disappointment. The storm did pass. The rain softened to a drizzle, and the thunder rumbled its way over the mountains. The silence that fell in its wake felt heavier than before. I gave him back his clothes, which he took without a word, and walked back to my newly secured tent through the damp, clean-smelling air. I lay awake for hours, listening to the creak, my mind replaying every moment in his cabin. The warmth of the fire, the scent of his clothes, the look in his eyes. I had come here for solitude, to be alone with my thoughts. But now, all my thoughts were of him. The next week was a study in exquisite torture. The dynamic between us had shifted. The professional veneer was gone, replaced by a palpable awareness. The air crackled whenever we were near each other. Our brief encounters at the firewood pile or the camp store were laden with unspoken things. His eyes would linger on my mouth when I spoke. I would find myself watching the way his jeans fit across his thighs as he bent to fix a leaky spigot. It was a silent, frustrating dance of advance and retreat. Then, the weekend arrived, and with it, a new batch of campers. A trio of guys in their late 20s set up in the site next to mine, their truck adorned with bumper stickers I found vaguely threatening. They were loud from the start, their music blaring, their laughter grating. I tried to ignore them, retreating into my headphones and my laptop, but their presence was an unavoidable intrusion. That evening, as I was cooking my sad dinner of instant ramen over my camp stove, one of them swaggered over. He was blonde, with the kind of frat boy arrogance that set my teeth on edge. "Hey man," he said, looking at my setup with a smirk. "Just you out here? All by your lonesome?" "Just me," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Right on. Getting in touch with your inner Thoreau, huh?" He glanced at the novel I had lying on the table, a well-worn copy of a James Baldwin classic. His smirk widened. Interesting reading material. The subtext was clear. My stomach tightened. I knew this script. I had lived it 1,000 times in high school, in college, in bars where I thought I was safe. "It's a good book," I said, my voice colder than I intended. I bet he laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Well, hey, if you get too lonely over here, you let us know. We're having a real party. None of that quiet reading stuff." He sauntered back to his site, and I heard him mutter something to his friends, followed by a round of snickering. I felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up my neck. I wanted to pack my car and leave right then. Run away again. It was what I was good at. My hands were shaking as I tried to eat my noodles, the food tasteless in my mouth. Just as I was about to give up and crawl into my tent to hide, Cole appeared at the edge of my sight. He moved with that silent grace of his, a ghost in the twilight. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the site next door, where the music was now loud enough to rattle the fillings in my teeth. "Everything all right over here, Liam?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of something hard and sharp. The use of my first name was a small shock. He'd never used it before. Before I could answer, the blond guy noticed him. "Hey, Ranger Rick." "Problem?" Cole slowly turned his head, his expression utterly flat. "Quiet hours start in 30 minutes. Your music is disturbing other campers. Turn it down." Now it wasn't a request. The guy bristled, puffing out his chest. "Yeah? Or what?" Cole took a single step forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a threat. He just stood there, his presence radiating a kind of primal authority that needed no embellishment. He was bigger than the other man, not just in height, but in substance. He was rooted to the earth, immovable. "Or you'll be packing up your things in the dark," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. For a long moment, the two of them were locked in a standoff. The blond guy's bravado seemed to shrink under Cole's unwavering stare. Finally, he broke eye contact, muttering a curse under his breath. He stomped back to his stereo, and turned it off. The sudden silence was profound. Cole watched them for another moment before turning back to me. The hardness in his face softened as his eyes met mine. "You okay?" he asked again, his voice gentle now. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. He hadn't just enforced a rule. He had defended me. He had stood between me and the ugliness, a silent, solid shield. It was a gesture of protection so profound it left me breathless. He lingered for a moment, his hands tucked into his back pockets. The space between us was humming with everything we weren't saying. I wanted to thank him, to tell him what that meant to me, but the words were stuck. All I could manage was a shaky, "Thanks." He just gave me that short, sharp nod and walked away, melting back into the deepening shadows. I watched him go, a fierce, protective warmth blooming in my chest, a feeling so potent it almost hurt. I wasn't going anywhere. I couldn't. Not now. The next afternoon was quiet. The obnoxious trio kept to themselves, shooting me sullen glares, but otherwise leaving me alone. I actually managed to write a few hundred words, the story flowing for the first time in months, fueled by the leftover adrenaline and a confusing, hopeful energy. I felt alive. I was sitting at the picnic table, rereading what I'd written, when I saw Cole starting his afternoon rounds. He moved from site to site with his usual efficiency, checking the little paper tags clipped to the posts. My heart started its familiar, frantic rhythm as he got closer. This was it. The air felt thin, electric. I could feel the story of us reaching its climax. He stopped at the edge of my sight, his boots crunching on the gravel. He didn't look at me at first, his attention focused on the tag on my tent post. He reached out and touched it, his brow furrowing slightly. "Your tag's faded," he said, his voice neutral. "Sun's bleached the date. I need to give you a new 1 inch. "Oh, okay." My own voice sounded reedy and strange. He turned to me then, and his eyes held mine. The campground, the trees, the sound of the creek, it all faded away. There was only the space between us, charged and humming. He stood there for a long moment, his gaze intense, searching. It felt like he was reading every secret thought I'd ever had. I stand up. I don't know why, but my legs just move, carrying me closer to him until only a few feet separate us. My breath is shallow. My hands are clenched at my sides. This is the tipping point, the moment where the story changes forever. He looked like he was about to say something, to break the spell. His mouth opened slightly, but then he closed it. Instead of speaking, he took a step forward, closing the remaining distance between us. His gaze dropped from my eyes to my chest, to my waist. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion that made the world stand still, he reached out and hooked a single, calloused finger into the front belt loop of my jeans. My breath hitched. A shockwave went through me, a bolt of pure, unadulterated lightning. It wasn't a rough gesture. It was firm, possessive, a claim. He didn't say a word. He just tugged gently, an undeniable summons. And I went. He led me away from my campsite, away from the prying eyes of anyone who might be watching. He led me up the path, his fingers still hooked in my belt loop, a physical tether connecting us. My feet followed him automatically, my mind a blank slate of shock and anticipation. We walked past the bathhouse, past the firewood pile, and went behind the main office, into the narrow, shadowed space between the log building and the dense wall of the forest. The air was cool back there, and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. He stopped, finally letting go of my belt loop, only to place his hands on the rough log wall on either side of my head, caging me in. His body was a wall of heat in front of me, so close I could feel it through my shirt. "Liam," he breathed, and the sound of my name on his lips was an undoing. His face was inches from mine, his green eyes dark with an emotion I couldn't dare to name. It was raw, unguarded, a look I had been waiting to see since the moment I first saw him. I saw hunger there, and hesitation, and a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "Cole," I whispered, my voice barely audible. And that was all it took. He closed the remaining distance, and his mouth was on mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of weeks of unspoken tension and yearning finally breaking free. It was rough and hungry and honest. His lips were firm, his stubble scratching against my skin in a way that was both abrasive and intoxicating. One of his hands moved from the wall to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me to him as he deepened the kiss. I made a sound in the back of my throat, a mix of surprise and surrender, and my hands came up to grip his forearms, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. It wasn't like kissing Andrew. Andrew's kisses had been practiced, smooth, almost performative by the end. This was something elemental. It was the storm and the quiet after. It was the scent of pine and the heat of a fire. It was a conversation we'd been having without words since the day I arrived, and this was the final, irrefutable sentence. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His breathing was as ragged as my own. I could feel the frantic beat of his heart against my chest, or maybe it was mine. I couldn't tell where one of us ended and the other began. "I shouldn't have done that," he murmured, his voice thick. But he didn't move away. "Yes," I breathed. "You should have." He pulled back just enough to look at me, a searching, questioning look in his eyes. I answered it by rising on my toes and kissing him again, slower this time. It was a kiss of reassurance, of confirmation. A kiss that said, "Yes, this is real. Yes, this is what I want." He sighed into my mouth and kissed me back, his hands moving to my waist, pulling me flush against him. It was right. After months of feeling wrong, of feeling displaced and hollow, this one thing, in this hidden space behind a campground office, felt absolutely, unequivocally right. The next morning, I woke up with the sun, a nervous energy thrumming through me. The world looked different. The green of the pines seemed more vibrant, the murmur of the creek more musical. Everything was sharper, more defined. I crawled out of my tent, my lips still feeling bruised and sensitive from his kiss, my body still humming with the memory of his hands on me. I made coffee, my hands shaking slightly. What now? What happened after a kiss that felt like it had rearranged the stars? I saw him emerge from his cabin, and my heart did a painful lurch. He stretched, his shirt riding up to reveal a strip of tan skin above the waistband of his jeans. He ran a hand through his messy hair, and then he looked over toward my sight. Our eyes met across the distance. My stomach plummeted. I expected something. A smile. A wave. A sign that yesterday had meant as much to him as it had to me. Instead, he gave me the same curt, non-committal nod he'd given me every other morning. And then he turned and went about his chores, disappearing with the axe toward the woodpile. The silence was a physical blow. The vibrant world of a moment ago turned gray. My writer's brain, my worst enemy, kicked into overdrive. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. He regretted it. I was just a temporary diversion, a story he'd tell himself later. The old, familiar shame washed over me. I was a fool. I should have known better. I spent the next few hours in a fog of anxiety, packing up my things with a frantic, jerky energy. I would just go, disappear. It was what I did best. Running was my superpower. I had the tent folded, my cooler packed, everything but my laptop stowed in the car. I was wrestling the tent bag into the trunk when his voice came from behind me, low and steady. Leaving? I froze, my back to him. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't let him see the pathetic disappointment on my face. "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. "Got what I came for." The quiet, it was a lie, and it tasted like ash. I heard his footsteps on the gravel, coming closer. "Did you?" He was right behind me now. I could feel his presence, that familiar warmth. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Liam," his voice was softer now. "Look at me." Slowly, I turned. His expression wasn't guarded anymore. It was open, and etched with an emotion I finally recognized as uncertainty. His own brand of fear. The stoic protector was just as lost as I was. "I'm not good at this," he said, gesturing vaguely between us. "Words. All this. You don't have to be," I whispered. He took a step closer and reached out, not with the confident possession of yesterday, but with a hesitant gentleness. He took my hand. His large, calloused palm enveloped mine, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. It was a simple gesture, but it was an anchor. It was a promise. "Don't go," he said, his green eyes pleading. "I was hoping you'd stay." Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees felt weak. I just nodded, unable to speak, and squeezed his hand. We stood there for a long time, just holding hands in the middle of my half-packed campsite, the silence between us no longer empty, but full of a new and fragile understanding. Later, as if to test us, the blond guy from the next site walked by on his way to the bathhouse. He saw our joined hands, and a sneer twisted his lips. He muttered a slur just loud enough for us to hear. I flinched, instinctively starting to pull my hand away. But Cole's grip tightened, holding me fast. He didn't look at the guy. He didn't say a word. He just turned his body slightly, positioning himself between me and the other man, and brought my hand to his lips, pressing a soft, defiant kiss to my knuckles. It was a silent, unwavering declaration. He is with me. The guy scoffed and hurried away, his hatred rendered impotent by a simple act of love. I didn't leave. I unpacked my car, set my tent back up, and stayed. The end of my 2-week reservation came and went. I paid for another week, and then another. My novel was forgotten in its case on the picnic table. The story I was living was far more compelling. Cole and I found our rhythm. It was a quiet thing, built not on grand declarations, but on small intimacies. It was in the way he'd leave a fresh bundle of firewood at my side every morning. It was in the way I'd bring him a mug of coffee, made just the way he liked it. It was in shared silences by the fire, our shoulders brushing, his hand finding mine in the dark. We talked, really talked, about our lives before this. He told me about growing up in a town not unlike this one, about a failed engagement to his high school sweetheart, about finding peace in the solitude of the mountains. I told him about Andrew, about the suffocating noise of the city, about the fear that I'd never write another word, that I'd never feel at home anywhere. As the season wound down and the crisp autumn air began to bite, the campground slowly emptied. Soon, it was just us. The silence was no longer something to be filled, but something to be shared. One evening, as we sat on the porch of his cabin watching the sun set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink, he handed me a single, worn brass key. "The owner lets me stay through the winter," he said, not looking at me. "It gets quiet. Lonely. Sometimes." He finally turned his head, his gaze steady and clear. I was thinking it might not be so lonely this year. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a grand, sweeping promise of forever. It was something better. It was an invitation. A conscious choice. It was a key to a small cabin in the woods, and it was everything. I took the key, its metal cool against my palm. "I think you're right," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Now, we sit on this porch every night. We watch the last of the autumn leaves fall and wait for the first snow. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we don't. Often, he'll just reach over and take my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles in that way that makes my heart feel both calm and wild at the same time. I haven't opened my laptop in weeks. The blinking cursor doesn't haunt me anymore. The story I needed to write wasn't about the characters I'd invented. It was about the man sitting next to me. It was about me. I came to the mountains looking for an escape, for a way to outrun the emptiness inside me. I thought I needed solitude to find myself again. But I was wrong. I didn't need to be alone. I just needed to be still. I needed to find the one person in the world who could make the silence feel like coming home.